So my name is Madeline Snow, and we will start off our webinar today. And for some reason, I can't pick up my title slide. And I will have to say, we're going to play some Zoom bingo today. And what I mean by that is you're each to keep track of the number of times we say, I need to be unmuted, or you're muted, unmute yourself. So our goal is to have that 5 times only, but keep track. And then we're going to have 3 glitches. We're allowed 3 glitches in the videos and PowerPoints. And I think I've already started one, so there's one, but I want you all to be on your toes and keep track. I would like to actually thank an awful lot of people who participated in this project, this oral history project. From the original team that started working on this way back when, Tyler Arrigo, Kathy Crumbly, Felice Kincannon, Thomas McNamara, and I know I pronounced that terribly, Yunnan Quinn, and special thanks for a little bit of funding from the UMass President's Sustainability Grant Program and from UMass Lowell's Sustainability Office. And Peg, I would like to thank you so much for all your work on this. And why don't you acknowledge our photographers.
In the introduction, you saw some photographs from Lowell photographers, Kevin Harkins, Joseph Dunn, and Sakun Pot. And I want to thank them for allowing us to use their pictures.
And so John, at this point, I'd like to hand it over to John Wooding to talk a little bit about Lowell as a learning city, our partnership with Cork, and the origin of this oral history project.
Okay, thank you, Madeline. Welcome and good morning, everybody. So a lot of people I haven't seen for a while on this Zoomcast. So Madeline asked me just to give you a very brief introduction, and many of you were there at the sort of birth of this activity, of this program. And it started way back in 2016, in the fall of 2016, I think it was December. We held a 3-day conference on sustainability at UMass Lowell with friends and colleagues from Cork, Ireland. Some of you were there. The conference was attended by close to 60 people for the 3 days. We were talking about how we could work together, collaborate, get engaged, learn from each other around the whole question of both university and community sustainability. And it was a great conference, and about 6 projects. We really worked on getting projects that came out of that conference, one of which was this project, Landscape of Memories. And the focus of this particular project as it came out of this was very much on how we can think to engage the community in their knowledge and background of these 2 cities, which, by the way, we sort of realized very quickly were very similar, both old cities, and most particularly because both cities had a river running through them, River Lee in Cork and the Merrimack in Lowell, which, as many of you know, was critical to the start of the Industrial Revolution, and the canal system that we built, or was built in the mid-19th century, which powered the looms and mills that made Lowell a textile city. As we started to think about this project, and I was not directly involved, but working with folks that came out of it, we, as Madeline mentioned, were grateful for a grant from the UMass President's Office to help fund these projects, one of which, again, was the Landscape of Memories. But the folks that were working on it were very, very much focused on how do you present this stuff that reflects the life of the community of these 2 cities, that it's an oral history and a way of framing the comparison between the 2 cities around this issue of landscape, of the contours of the city, and in particular the rivers themselves. We were very much intending to commit this to a community event and to recognize the value and knowledge of the community. And all of this, was, of course, was underlying the concepts that are around learning cities. And to close, I would say that this event, this conference, which led to this project, also led to Lowell becoming and working towards becoming a learning city, because it was at that conference that John O'Halloran, who was then, I think, provost of the University College in Cork, and several of the folks there from Cork, when we took him out around learning around Lowell and showed him all the good pubs and showed him the background and the history, John said to me, "Why aren't you a learning city?" I didn't know what a learning city was. And so as we began to think about this a bit more, and it led to some of us going to Cork in 2017 and figuring out what a learning city was, since that point in time and since that conference, we've been building a program to develop Lowell into a learning city, and have had 2 or 3 festivals of learning, and have worked very closely with Cork in collaborations, not only with Landscapes of Memories, but other kinds of events, seminars, webinars, and so forth, many of which, of course, last year were done virtually. But it's been an incredibly exciting project. It's been wonderful to see the product that came out of that, this webinar today. And I'm looking forward to seeing the film and the oral histories that were established by something which I think was really a unique event and a unique collaboration. So I'll leave it over to you to move on forward. Thanks for having me say a few words, and I'll see you at the other end, and we'll close up about what we've been doing here. It's just great to have this collaboration. Thank you. And
even though I've messed up my screen, etc., this piece of paper, this flip chart, was our original notes from that particular meeting as the Landscapes of Memory project was developed. So with that, if I can turn to John McCone from the Merrimack River Watershed Council, who'll give a little brief history of the Merrimack River, and then we'll go to Kieran, who'll talk about the River Lee and Cork.
Thank you, Madeline. I'm going to go through 10,000 years of history in 4 minutes, so please put on your seatbelt here. And okay, so we're going to talk about the Merrimack River. Everyone hear me okay?
Yep. Great.
Okay. So just to give you a sense of this river, this is the 4th largest watershed in New England. 600,000 people get their drinking water from this river, which is really quite amazing. To give you some ideas, this is our natural landscape of the Merrimack. This is where the Merrimack originates, some of these locations that are well known in New England: Lake Winnipesaukee, Franconia Notch, Mount Monadnock, Wachusett Mountain in Massachusetts. It passes through the birthplace of the American Revolution, the watershed does, the Concord River. And also, as Madeline mentioned, the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution in Lowell. I want to talk a little bit about the origin of this river. This was formed at the end of the last ice age, and it was a massive lake when it began that had its headwaters in Lowell, and that dam that was there broke and formed this river. Native Americans discovered it and used it as a source of their food supplies, especially at the great falls that are along the river, and established communities all up and along the Merrimack River. Puritans arrived, Europeans, in 1628, and they immediately saw the advantages of this river. It's so much food in it, massive amount of fish that were harvested. It was also a highway for them to get inland to explore what was inland in America. And so this became a highway of sorts to find new resources and to tap them. Also became the site of one of the first major American cities in the Northeast, Newburyport, which is a major shipping hub. The Merrimack has some major waterfalls along it. And so these were seen as places that could be used to begin the American Industrial Revolution, to harvest water and to use it to power mills. So Lowell becomes the first place where this happens. There's 6 miles of canals, which is one of the largest canal networks in the United States. There are others along the Merrimack as well, other canal systems. Lowell's founded 1822, and very quickly a number of other cities spring up along the Merrimack. We start to see the first ecological problems thanks to Henry David Thoreau, who canoes up it with his brother and starts to see that there are major changes, ecological changes that are happening, such as the fisheries are being destroyed by the dams. And he also sees that there's this yellow water that's coming down. He can't really identify. Well, we know today what it was. The White Mountains were being deforested and destroyed for lumber. This drew so much attention, it was finally ended around 1900, basically by people who got together and said, we've got to solve this. They started to buy up massive amounts of land to protect the White Mountains and the Merrimack River, and also created the National Forest System that we know today to protect the Merrimack. the Merrimack was polluted by all of this industry that was going on along it, as Thoreau called it, a mere wastewater in his day. These are some images of dye that's coming out of mills. This was a typical kind of day along one of the tributaries of the Merrimack in the 1960s. It was another day, another dye. But the Clean Water Act is passed in the United States in 1972, and it's meant to start to clean up our rivers with sewage treatment plants and stopping this massive scale dumping. You can see an image here that gives you an idea of how much cleaner it is today. Organizations like my organization, Merrimack River Watershed Council, were founded also. This is our 45th anniversary, and these are our founders, Rosalind Tufts and Nate Tufts. Organizations like these have helped to bridge gaps between communities and the government to affect the cleanups of rivers and to promote them and to draw attention to them. So the Merrimack is much cleaner than it was 50 or 100 years ago. We still have a ways to go, but we see that people are enjoying the river now, and we think the river has a bright future.
You've used up your first mute mistake, Madeline.
I'm so sorry. There you go. Everyone's keeping track, right? I got 1 and 1. All right, there you go. Kieran.
Okay, thank you very much, Madeline. I'll just share my screen. So the River Lee is about 50 miles long, and it rises in the Sheehy Mountains surrounding this lake in Gugambara, and still an Irish-speaking enclave in Cork County. And this is where in the 6th century, St. Finbar founded his school. And the motto of University College Cork is where Finbar taught, let Munster learn. And close to this area, much later on than when St. Finbar was here, there was a thriving salmon angling business where tourists would come to fish for salmon. But that all ended in 1953 with the hydroelectric scheme. It's built dams like this dam in Escara, which basically prevented most of the salmon from coming upriver to spawn and destroy that tourism industry. And it also flooded areas along the Lee, particularly this area downriver called the Gera, which was an ancient oak alluvial forest, one of the oldest in Europe, which was felled and flooded. And there's also a small village was lost. But this area has now become a nature reserve with a walkway for people to enjoy. Further downriver, in the 1790s, this weir was built along with a series of canals in order to power the gunpowder mills. This is a reconstruction of the gunpowder mills, and I suppose it's a reminder of Cork and Ireland's colonial past and its role in not just famously opposing the empire, the British Empire, internally and externally, but also in supplying and provisioning parts of the empire through parts of its history as well. And this area in Ballincollig has also become a regional park. So you see the trends of industry and commerce and engineering changing over time and becoming part of a leisure facility. Further downriver, you can see in this map of the central island in Cork City, the river splits into the North Channel and the South Channel, creating this distinctive island. But it wasn't always like this. Initially, it would have looked a little something like this, a series of islands and marshes, which was founded in the 9th century by Viking settlers, which would have been this kind of north-south spine that you see in the center of this picture, which is where the original settlement would have been. Over time, that would have been walled in. You can see that the river actually went right into the center of the city, and there was that portcullis river gate that allowed ships coming into the center of the city. And over time, those marshes and river channels were filled in. And this one you can see where it says Patrick Street, center right, That used to be a river channel, and over time all those were filled in. This is a picture from, say, the late 19th century, early 20th century from the Lawrence collection. And you can see, this is the North Channel, and you can see the proliferation of boats, which are no longer present. You can also see the quay walls, which are pretty much still intact. In the distance, you can see the spars of tall ships, and some of that smoke is probably from industrial chimneys, but some of the lower ones are probably from the funnels of ships coming into trade, and maybe ferries as well. So you can see the Cork was a very busy port. Again, it had some contracts with the Cork merchant princes to supply the British Army with food, particularly from preserved meats from the surrounding area. And we have oral history testimony in the Cork Folklore Project, people remembering abattoirs up in the hills and near the quays of the city, where the blood and waste of the abattoirs were just flowing into the open river. Fortunately, that no longer occurs as far as I've seen. And that red line there indicates that north-south spar of the original Viking settlement, and that green line represents the Main Street, Patrick Street, which was originally part of the river channel. So the city is made up of marshes and culverted rivers. Just at the end of that central island is the working docks there in the background, Kennedy Quay, where live cattle are still brought for export. You can see the cranes there for bringing out different grains stored in the grain silo or in H Hall. So fertilizer is brought in. You can see in the foreground, very obviously, a traditional Irish curragh, not native to Cork, native to Kerry. Don't tell them that, but very much in use in Cork City. So we begin to see the industrial and the leisure combining. In the distance there, you can see that ESB power station chimney, and just beyond that, we have this area, the Marina, fancily named after an Italian walkway by the river. This is more conventional rowing, and the leafy marina, which has now been pedestrianized. So that's that section on the south bank there is the marina. On the north bank, you can see the Tivoli docks where the container ships are still unloading. And further on the right-hand side, you can see just that little gray area, the N40, actually the Jack Lynch Tunnel, which was built in the 1990s to go under the river. And around there is where the river flows into Loch Mahon, and then it begins to connect with the greater harbour area, ceases to become a river really, and forms part of the second largest natural harbour in the world. The last point of interest there is on the map is the Blackrock Castle Observatory, just here taken from a much earlier photograph from the Roy Hamming collection at the Cork Folklore Project. And in front is the Inishfallen ferry, which is synonymous in Cork with immigration, another part of the story of Cork and Ireland, and of course the story that links with Lowell in many respects. Here's some photo credits, and that's the end of my presentation. Stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Kieran.
Welcome.
Tomas, can I ask you to give a few words about why oral history? Why do any of this?
Certainly, no problem, Madeline. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Look, first of all, I went to Lowell first, and I think about August, September 2016, to speak at a 1916 conference. And during that conference, it was mentioned that there was a sustainability conference coming up in the following months. And as I tend to do, I started talking about how maybe oral history could play a role in exploring that whole world. And as I have gotten all the time in Lowell, I was met with a very positive response. An invitation was extended. And then I came over in whenever it was, October 2016. But when I was going to that conference that you mentioned earlier on and that John mentioned, you know, the format was unusual in that you'd have to make a case, I suppose, at your table for what project you would feel would be worthwhile. And I wasn't really sure what kind of a response I would get, because I suppose you wouldn't think automatically of oral history when you consider maybe sustainability and our environment, etc. But again, I was met with great positivity from you, Madeline, and from other people like Felice and Ewan and Quinn from Donegal as well, who was at the table. So it's been a really positive experience from that point of view of accepting the potential of oral history to play a positive role in this project. And I think the way in which the project evolved has demonstrated its potential, you know, both in terms of the way in which human stories can encapsulate so much of our experience, and the way in which, you know, attention to that oral testimony can really illuminate aspects of our, you know, our own experience, but also the physical landscape around us. And, you know, in terms of both Cork and in terms of Lowell, the ability for people connected to both rivers in different ways to provide testimony and insight into the way in which our relationship with those rivers have changed, the contributions made by those rivers to our lives, the neglect at times to those, is all borne out very powerfully within the oral testimony of people. So the learning that's inherent in that is very, very obvious. And I think now that we've done it, even though there were relatively small cohorts at both sides of the Atlantic, I think there's enough there to demonstrate the potential for, you know, further engagement in oral heritage and oral history, in helping us to understand our landscape around us, to the way it has changed and the way we can address it. So it's been a hugely positive experience for us in Cork. You know, we're 25 years old this year in the Cork Folklore Project. And over that 25 years, we've always sought to look at other ways to apply the discipline of oral history to the broader benefit of society, both in terms of learning about our societies and our communities, and also reconnecting people. And I think that's maybe the next step in some ways, or at least some of the next steps in this project, is that we engaged with people who were deeply connected to the River Lee and to the Merrimack. But now I think, you know, part of our ambition should be using the material we have collected to re-engage other people who maybe are not connected with those rivers. And I think that has to be really to the forefront of our efforts, because if people ignore the rivers and they ignore their value, and they ignore the value of their natural landscape around them, that's going to be a problem for all of us. So I think that oral history, the resource, can play a really, really important role with that. So look, the final point I'll make is that, you know, we started this in 2016. It's 5 years later now. It's all been very, very positive. Kieran Murphy there did fantastic work in the collecting on our side. And I know from having met with you guys in Lowell, you know, the work was exemplary out there as well. So, you know, we have something very positive, both in terms of our approach in using oral history, the material we have collected. And, you know, we can just find a way that people can be more connected to those rivers, whether you're walking along, you know, by the River Lee thinking of Sean O'Faolain, or if you're in, you know, Lowell beside the Memory-Merrimack thinking of Jack Kerouac. You know, knowing your landscape around you, being able to read it is something that's massively positive. And the rivers have kept flowing. In those 5 years, so much has changed in the world. You know, the pandemic, to mention just one thing, but those two rivers have continued to flow in those 5 years, and they'll continue to flow, please God, if we take care of them and look after them. So listen, I want to thank you on behalf of the Cork Folklore Project. It was fantastic work with you, and I look forward to continuing the work over the coming years.
Thank you, Tomas. I have to say, one of the connections, would I ever have bought this book, Tomas, if I hadn't met you? Would I ever have been interested in an oral history of the War of Independence in County Clare? No, but now I have this book. So there you go. There are connections across the Atlantic, no matter what. So now, at the risk of using up one of my chits on to see if the video was going to work, on this side of the Atlantic, we did decide to do visual interviews, and I want to thank Aaron King for pulling this together, Wael Kamal and Med Ali and Tyler Arrigo, who were very, very involved in the development of this video. So I'm going to try now, and forgive me. Let's try it. One moment, please. All right, here we go. No, not right, wrong one. One. See, all right, am I up to 3 now or 2? I can't quite figure out. 2, okay, all right. All right, here we go. Let's try it.
The reason Lowell exists, the river set in motion a chain of events that led to the creation of Lowell. That's why this is here.
You know, here in the Merrimack River was the source of the industrialization here in Lowell. You know, make Lowell become the first plant industrial, you know, in America, where water was used primarily to power that, you know, garment industry.
I don't know even if anybody even knew what the word environment meant in those days. It was just a foreign term. All of those population centers were dumping their sewage right into the river.
Through pollutants and safety, you know, you don't want to take those kind of risks. The canals and the river were looked upon as things to be avoided.
Everybody turned their backs to the river.
It just got to the point where people didn't care about the river. They just over time, a lot of different people started looking at it and they started caring. If it's polluted, not many people are going to want to drink it. They're going to start thinking, all this pollution is in the water. This is going into my system. Why, you know, not care about it when you're going to be drinking the water?
The respect of your environment. You know, the respect of the water. It provides you life. That is your life. If you damage the water, if you pollute the water, guess what happens? If you pollute yourself, you're killing yourself.
Human beings are drawn to water. Maybe it's because we emerged from water. And I think that if you look at cities that have been successful, who have kind of remade themselves in post-industrial America, having a waterway is central to that. And I think it's a combination of water and nature. It's just, I think, a setting that's conducive to people relaxing.
Water is life, it's nature, it's beauty, it's celebrations, and all the good things in life. Yeah.
We have to have water, and we need clean water. The whole business of our life, the survival of the human race, is water.
Oh. So, yay. I've watched it many times, and I still get a nice little thrill of it, I have to say. I'm actually going to ask one of the interviewees, Sam Khan, if I can ask you to unmute. And from your perspective of being interviewed, giving some oral history, what was it like?
Oh, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Great to see many familiar faces I haven't seen for so long. What was it like to be the interviewee? You know what? I didn't expect to see myself, you know, and on the screen on the video. It was like a personal sharing of what the Merrimack River meant to me, and then, of course, you know, at the times when I first, you know, transplant or flew into Lowell in 1995. I was so fascinated with the river, and at the time it was not friendly. It was not useful, in a positive way. And of course, there's a saying in our Cambodian sayings that where there's water, there's fish. And at the time, majority of the Cambodian refugees and South Asian refugees member would go to the Memory-Merrimack River and fish. And then those fish were not for sport, but for consumption. So they caught a number of fish, and I didn't know that the fish was polluted with mercury and lead and other, and so they brought it home and they cooked for their family. And some of the pregnant wife would eat it, and it caused health issue to to the women. So at the time we were trying to we had to we had to educate our community member about the danger of eating this fish because obviously it's not healthy, and that how it attract me more to the river, and of course we make a celebration out of that. We make the water festival out of that in 1997. But it was really something that again it's so meaningful to us. Water is again it's a source of life. Here in America, it's the Merrimack, came to the industrial, licensing here, and then but back in Southeast Asia, it is a source of life to the agricultural, life. There where there some 100,000 of folk depend on water on a daily.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to go to Kieran again to have some of the oral history from the River Lee.
Thanks, Madeline. As you said, that your interviews were conducted by video. I was very envious looking at all those beautiful images. Our interviews were conducted by using audio, which comes with its own advantages. We'd like to think that you can focus more on the individual voices and the stories. I put some images with them, but I'm very jealous of the video. I wish we had the resources and the technology and the storage and the editing skills to be able to produce that kind of high quality video, and hopefully we will in the future.
Thank you, Aaron King, student.
So this is the audio and slideshow collection that we have for this, and I'm interested to see how the auto-generated subtitles work with the Cork accent.
I actually shut it off because I tried and it didn't work well.
The city that I got to know, they were also the keepers of the river. Eddie Flynn said to me one day, he used to address me and I think most people as cuz. He just said, cuz there's a peel going up the river. A peel is a young juvenile salmon. And I could see absolutely nothing. And he was trying to tell me, look, you see, there was some little wave on the surface. They would also fish bodies. That was part of their work, was fishing bodies out of the river. I heard a story of they fished out, I don't know, a sea captain or something out in the river, and they sat him on the stern of the boat, he did, and they were going up the river, and they forgot the height of one of the bridges, Clontarf Bridge or something, and he just went over the transom back into the river, and they fished him out again. And his patriot's vision seems bright. I dreamed that was choice. And until, as I said, till the late 90s, we just used it as an open sewer. If you go down the river at low tide, you will still see raw sewerage coming into the river in various spots. Not anyway like the volumes it used to, but you can see it without too much trouble. I'll give you an example. Those houses back onto the lake, all of the residents and owners of those houses basically have put big fences up. So they don't have to look at the river, they don't have to think about the river, they don't have to engage in the river anyway at all. Okay? So we don't think about the river. We see the river as a source of problems, as a threat and a danger. We don't see it as a source of income. We don't see it as a source of recreation. Given the chance, most people would rather the river be filled in and covered over and got rid of. Where we sported and played, near green leafy shade, on the banks of my own. I want to swim that way down in the Lee. I'm going out from, let's just say, from Hellwood down to Blackrock. I never saw a woman swimming in the Lee. And a girl now, like, like girls of our own age, I never saw a girl swim. But I went back to my time on the properties. Why do you think that was? I don't know, really. I suppose it was modest. Looking back on it, no, another thing that would make you laugh is starting to feed in togs, as we used to call them, You have fellas with their sister's bloomers or their mother's bloomers and all different colours. Like, no, I'm giving a damn, That's just the way things are. Oh, my own lovely lady,
And just two more verses I have when to sing them. And may the Lord days is blessed, shall I ever forget.
Thank you, Karen. Karen, can you just add a few insights in terms of what it was like to be the interviewer in this case?
Sure. I think, at the risk of stating the obvious, that the River Lee is a very open topic. You know, it's something that we all have access to. Just in contrast, a lot of our interviews are about something very specific. It's about somebody's own personal life and their own experiences from childhood, to which maybe only them or their siblings have access. Or it's about, say, for instance, our most recent project with the Grattan Street Memories project. It's about one medical facility in which only people who go into it or work there really have any opinions or any experiences. But the River Lee is such a broad, I suppose, democratic field in which people can have their opinions. And it's the kind of thing you can almost take for granted, that you know what the Lee is because you have your own experiences of it. But when you get to interview people, you realize people have opinions. And as you see, people also have opinions about other people's opinions. And you have the two extremes of the fishermen whose life was kind of dictated by the tides. I mean, Padraig in that clip said that he used to think that the fisherman was so in touch with the tides and the river that he would walk along the streets where the river was culverted, that he had an unusual way of walking through the city, and that he would follow the invisible paths of the river beneath him. And then the other extreme of people that Tom talked about, who would turn their backs to the river, which was something mentioned in the Memory-Merrimack River. And I guess it made me realize that there is that scope of ways of relating to the river, and that, like in so much else in oral history, you can't take those things for granted and people's opinions for granted. And you have to be open to the possibility that other people have different experiences to you. I think that was one of my experiences. And then lastly, Liam, who gave us the song and the stories about the swimming. I suppose it was amazing to think that even in the past, when the river was more polluted, there was probably more swimming going on in the Lee at the time.
By the men, not the women.
Yes, well, there were public baths, and there was a separate baths for men and ladies. But in the unregulated river, yeah, Liam says that he didn't see women's swimming. But I mean, that's just his recollection and his experience. There may be other people out there from Cork who did swim there. So that's the beauty of oral history. You get those different perspectives.
What's interesting to me is that no matter what, the people and the rivers have a relationship. It may be embracing the rivers, it may be protecting them, it may be shutting them off, but there is a relationship that you can't deny. With that, I'd like to just open up if anybody would like to ask a question or comment, and then we'll be finishing up with John McCone. But if you'd like, just unmute yourself and ask a question or provide a comment, whatever you'd like. Let's just take a few minutes for that. I don't believe the Irish are shy. That's what I've been told over and over again. So, and so here we go. Who has a question or a comment? How's that?
I have a comment.
Thank you, Luz. Wonderful to see you.
Can you hear?
Yeah.
Nice to see you too. So I know Medellin is one of the learning cities, and we have a wonderful river because, as you know, Lowell is one of the cities that benefit from many of the workers that came from Medellin to the mills. Mm-hmm. And maybe at some point we can do, because we have a beautiful river called El Río Medellin. I don't know when you guys went to Colombia, you were able to see it. And maybe next time we can include that big river that is very, very meaningful. And as the Merrimack River, the Rio Medellin has always been through a lot of transformation. My English, I become nervous when I talk in these things, but who cares? But the Rio Medellin is beautiful. I mean, in Christmas, they light up the whole river. They do a beautiful display there. It was polluted and disgusting, but we have done a lot with the river now. So maybe at some point, since Medellin is one of the learning cities, we can include that beautiful place.
That would be a wonderful connection, 3 continents, wonderful. With that, I'm up to 3 now. John, if I can ask you to talk a little bit about some of the next steps and challenges ahead. How's that?
Sure. So it's interesting listening to the stories of both rivers because there's so many commonalities I picked up on too. One is sewage. You know, it's hard to believe in this day and age that there's still sewage going into these rivers. The Merrimack has the same problem. I see somebody posted a note about that. We've invested billions of dollars into the Merrimack to prevent sewage, but it still goes in during major rainstorms. So that's something we need to be dealing with and fixing. Another issue was mentioned is salmon and fish populations. Merrimack has a very similar history to the River Lee in that we had these great migrations of fish that were cut off by our dams. We've tried to restore the salmon to the Merrimack, and that it was a failure. There's just no way to do it. I'd be curious to know if River Lee is looking for ways to do that. But we are seeing that there are other species of fish that are returning, which is very encouraging. Sturgeon, for example, we found a habitat area where there were 4,000 of them that were hibernating in the Merrimack, and that's a very large number. This is a fish that's virtually extinct. And one other issue I've been thinking about that perhaps is a connecting link is how climate change is going to impact the River Lee. We certainly see it along the Merrimack now. Our weather patterns are changing pretty dramatically. You know, in New England, we're seeing droughts, long extended droughts, which we're not used to, and then very powerful rainstorms and windstorms. And those storms are injecting a lot of runoff, polluted runoff into the Merrimack. And they're also blowing down a lot of trees. And trees are really our first line of defense against pollutants getting into the river. So, you know, and things are warming here too. And that's changing the types of trees and animals and flora and fauna that we have. I wonder if that's true with River Lee as well. But, you know, I look back at the history of the Merrimack and, you know, we've had a couple of really major ecological disasters that happened and were dealt with. And one of them was the massive tree clearing that was happening in the White Mountains that was eroding the mountains and really destroying the northern end of our watershed. And that was an effort that was fixed by people getting involved. You know, it was really started with the public and crying out and saying this needs to change and trying to take steps to do that. And also with the pollution in the river, in the 1970s, we saw Clean Water Act push through, and that injected a lot of money to help to build these sewage treatment plants. And that again started with the public. So I look forward to our next evolution of how we deal with climate change.
Thank you very much. This point, John Wooding, if you could close us out. And I would like to thank again, particularly Tyler Arrigo, who shepherded this project for a while, and it took quite a bit of time. But John, would you like to close us out?
Yeah, I would be very happy to. It was so great to see this reach fruition. I mean, after 4 years to have it out there and done. And again, I want to thank everybody who participated in this and all of you who are watching us. This is very much part of what we started back in 2016, not just only this project, but of those 6 projects we mentioned, I think at least 4 of them got some progress towards this kind of integration between Cork Island and Lowell. More importantly, of course, I think this whole thing, of which this is a part of, spurred us to try and become a learning city. And the work over the last 3 or 4 years with a big hole, like everybody else in the last year or so because of COVID, has been an incredibly exciting journey, a difficult one, hard one, challenging one. But I think that the concept that we're now dealing with, and particularly in the sort of, maybe hopefully the post-pandemic period, is this is a moment for all of us to rethink how we think about collaborations across countries like this, how we get the voice of the community and get it together and get it out there. And probably more importantly, how do we think about doing things differently given the experience of the pandemic? And I think nothing is more important to think about than the way we teach ourselves and we teach each other. And the whole idea of the Learning City and that development that came from the original conference was to create Lowell and many cities around the world as a place where the community learns with and for and from each other, and that the university and the park and all the institutions we have in our cities work together to say learning is not only about skills, it's not only about getting a job, it's not only about facts, it's about tolerance, understanding, and I'm going to sound incredibly naive here. Ultimately, it's about loving one another. So thank you for being here. And this was just a great program.